a real guy. He was the father of the king. He was never king. His brother was king. But then his brother didn't have a son, and he manipulated it into having his son at only 11 years old. The king we call Gojong, who's a big character in Mr. Sunshine, he put his son on the throne at 11 years old, and he really ran the government. This was a typical thing to do in East Asia, put a young boy on the throne, a youngster thing, and then the family really run, the parents or grandfather. In China, the grandmother at the end of the dynasty, the great-grandmother kept putting 2-year-old boys on the throne and ruling China herself and such. And when the boy got to be 10 years old, you just had him killed and poisoned, put another 2-year-old on the throne. Etc. Now, he did this. He put his son on the throne. That became King Kojong. He really ran the government at first until his son got to be about 21. And then his son started exercising power together with his wife. The son and his wife, the Queen Min, started exercising power and pushed him out. But he stayed alive right through the end of the Joseon dynasty, still alive, an infamous figure. He was really the leader to say, no, Korea is closed. No, we don't open up. We don't build factories or put in electricity or something. No, we keep Korean culture. We keep our way. And he was very infamous among like the Christian missionaries, the first American and European Christian missionaries who came here. They liked King Kojong, got along with him. They liked his wife very much. They thought she was very smart and she understood the importance of modern Western things. But they really hated this guy. They all looked down on him. He was their enemy. And this is a real true guy. And if you wanna look for one person who is at fault, one guy to blame, I mean, actually, really, there's very many, there's hundreds, but if you want to focus and find one guy who made Korea to be a failure and got it so that Japan took over Korea as a colony, whatever, it's mostly him. He's the guy you would look at. He is starting way back, 1860, whatever. He's saying, nope, no opening, no modernization. Stop that. We don't need modern culture. We are Korea. We have our Korean tradition. And he had many comrades. There were many philosopher, aristocrat like Hwasa Ihang No. I think a man who's largely been forgotten to modern Korea, but very important as a philosopher back then to be his ally and write philosophical essays about why Korea should just keep the foreigners out and stay with Korean culture. So he's a big character, Mr. Sunshine. You see him frequently through there, often like arguing at his son, standing in the palace, and his son is on the throne as King Kojong, and several times over many years, like, hey, King, you should stop doing that. And so that's the king's father doing this, and he's on the wrong side of history, in favor of isolation, in favor of remaining backwards, old-fashioned place. This is his son. These are two official portraits of him as king on the red robe and later as emperor. Emperor Gwangmu. Emperor Gwangmu, King Kojong to Emperor Gwangmu, promoted himself up to emperor. At the end, we'll get there later, the end of things. Okay, this is the last guy. Notice he was king for 47 years. That's really long. That's a long kingship. It's like, I think, the second longest one of the Joseon dynasty. He was king a long time, but it was all the end. It was a long, slow failure under him. It's a sad story until you get to 1910. And this is him in Mr. Sunshine in his younger days, and as later in the movie you see this turn gray out of all his stress and difficulty. But this is a real picture of him as Emperor Gwangmu. This is his son Sunjong, who is technically the last king. The Japanese, by 1907, they forced King Kojong to give up as emperor and allow his son to be called emperor and then just king later and such. And 1910, then they finished that. And Sunjong is technically the last king. But he really doesn't matter. He never had any power over anything. We believe, from what the Christian missionaries say, we believe he was an idiot. And I mean that literally. He was mentally disabled, low IQ, Sunjong. And it has always been said among Koreans that the Japanese poisoned him. When he was a young baby, a young boy, they fed lead to him. They fed lead, you know, the metal lead, and it lowered his IQ, damaged his brain. Just look at his face in here. Such missionaries always said he was kind of drooling out the side of his mouth, and he couldn't speak correctly. He was not all there, and the Japanese gave them the perfect opportunity with him being disabled to make him to be the king and such, and then taking over was fairly easy. His wife, now here, King Gojong, his famous wife, Queen Min. This is the real photos, the real person. She's not in the drama. They left that out. They made many other dramas in Korea, movies and TV shows about her and involving her. They didn't even include that. They just showed when she was murdered. They showed what happened after that. But she is important in this. She was smart. She's a little younger than her husband and such, but she apparently had brains, at least what the Christian missionaries, what they wrote in their records after meeting them. Nobody was ever impressed with Gojong. Nobody thought Gojong was a strong leader. They show him much better in Mr. Sunshine, I think much better than maybe what he really was. He had difficulty making decisions, being decisive. He was not a strong leader kind of a person. He just happened to be born to be the king, that's all. But everybody said, the Christian missionaries said she was sharp, she was smart, she played a lot of diplomacy. She talked to the Russians, she talked to the Germans, talked to the British, the Americans. She dealt with the missionary. She was so close to many of the missionaries. Some of them, one missionary once claimed that she converted to Christianity secretly, that she became a Christian, but that was secret, and we have no evidence. We don't know that that's true, but a missionary wrote a letter home to America, said the Queen accepted Jesus. But they were close to her. They met with her a lot, and they said she was smart. She could do the diplomacy. That's why the Japanese murdered her. Japanese killed her because she was the smart one to deal with this. Now, under King Gojong, there were some early reform attempts, and that Gojong did not lead those, did not support it, but some of the educated young men growing up as Confucian scholars under traditional education, but then they got more education. They started learning about the world by 1875 to 1880. Some of them went to Japan and got more modern education that was already happening in Japan, attended Japanese college. Then they came back to Korea and they said, look, we should modernize. Look, the Japanese have factories. They're producing thousands of guns every week and such. We should be doing that. We should reform. We should bring in electricity and later the telegraph, things like this. They tried. Now, there was actually a revolt, a revolution, where they tried a military coup d'etat. They got some soldiers on their side, these young reformists, as early as 1884. They tried, but they failed. Didn't work. They were betrayed. Somebody who knew about their plan, they told the police. The police busted these guys before they could get going, and the police, the people who tried to do this modernization revolt, they were killed. Most of them executed, and even their family was killed. Their wife, their children, their parents were killed by the dynasty just for trying this. So a bad backlash. Some of the earliest of them, they escaped, for example, to America. And this is where the story from Mr. Sunshine of Eugene being in America, becoming educated American citizen, then coming back to Korea. That's where that story comes from. Some of those really did, including a little later than 1884, but the first president of Korea, Lee Sik-man, or Syngman Rhee, Lee Sik-man was one of those early trying to educated by Christian missionaries here in Seoul, and also a bit by the Japanese, and wanting a modern Korea, getting in trouble. King Kojong wanted him dead, and he escaping to America, to Hawaii, and then ending up in Washington, D.C., becoming a lobbyist, and eventually returned to Korea 1945 and became the first president of Korea. So this kind of thing. Philip Jae-sung, who became the first Korean American by doing this, and other such heroes, An Chang-ho, etc. Okay, they did this. 1894, by the way, the reforms abolished slavery and civil service exams. Finally, Korea outlawed slavery and such, like other Western countries had already done, and Japan had already done, and the civil service, the old Confucian-style civil service exams, trying to modernize the government, 1894, but by then it was really too late. But this did lead to the system of Korean family names, which is one of the questions that was asked. It's on here. And just to say briefly how this ended up, Korea has very few family names. For an ethnic group of this size, there's just a little bit more than 100 family names among the entire Korean ethnic group, which is, I believe, the number 11th biggest ethnic group in the world as an ethnicity, to be Korean. To call yourself Korean, and you eat kimchi and drink soju, then you're a Korean. There's like 80 million Koreans in the world, both on the Korean peninsula, 2 different countries, Korea, and then the global Koreans, like in Koreatown, Los Angeles, whatever. People who identify or say, yes, I'm a Korean. There's like 80 million of those. It's the 11th biggest ethnic group in the world, but they have barely 100 family names, just a little bit over 100, and most of them, more than half, are just these 5 names. 5 names take up 54% of all Korean people. This is amazing. You never find this in another ethnic group. In America, we have just millions of family names because we're all immigrants, whatever, but 21.6% of Koreans are called Kim. Gold, it means gold. Kim. Actually should be pronounced Gum, but as a family name became pronounced Kim. It's gold at 21.6%. That's incredible. It's nearly a quarter of the country. And they're not supposed to marry each other according to social custom if your name is Kim. And then Lee, 14 point, almost 15% are Lee. This was the last ruling dynasty, the Joseon dynasty, the royal family name, Lee. Then Park, 8.5%, like Park Chung-hee, Park Geun-hye, and the other famous Parks we have recently had. Che, the Che family is like 2 million people. I wrote a book about them. There, and the Jung family at 4.4%. Just those 5 are 54% of all Koreans. Now, how did these are all noble families, except for Jung and Che. The first 3 are all people who were royalty since the beginnings of the Shilla kingdom. It goes back to mythology of around the year 0 or before 0 about the Najong Gwil and 6 tribes coming together and finding the first Pak Hyokose, and making him king of Shilla later. Goes back to these other family names all come from that myth, and many of these were royal dynasty names, especially Yi and Park and Kim. Kim for a long time were rulers of Shilla and such. Now the royal families of Goguryeo Kingdom and Baekje Kingdom, no, their names are lost, or there's very few Koreans with those names. Otherwise, the family is completely, totally gone and such. But from Shilla, largely, and Koreans, great noble classes, the nobility, what we later call the Yangban classes, had these names. Common people had no names. Up to like 80% of the population had no family name. They just had personal names. They were just David, and that's it. No fact, because families were just for nobility. A lot of Europe was like this also, Europeans. So I mean, England and such, family names was only for the top class people and such. Now, what happened as the Joseon dynasty broke down and they did start modernizing, and they destroyed the slavery system. Nobody's a slave, everybody's free. And then in a modern government system, you have to register people. They never did this before, but like all the people, you had to write down who lives here in this city, this village, whatever, and they would ask people their name, and they only had personal names. Most all Koreans did not have family names. So just like the same thing as what happened in America, people who were slaves or low-class farmers, workers, the guy who they worked for, they said, well, my family works for Mr. Kim, so you become a Kim. You take that name. Same thing would happen in America with the black people who were slaves. They had no name, no family name. They were just John, Mary, Richard, had a Christian personal names, and then they worked for Mr. Jones, so they became Richard Jones. When first we started making records of them, official government record. That's why you have the very famous black actor Will Smith. Why is his name Will Smith? William Smith. Smith, that's a British name of a metal worker, whatever. His ancestor used to work for Mr. Smith on some southern plantation. They got that name. That's why all African Americans have these European names these days. Some of those families, they're changing back to African style names now. They're rejecting the old name. But this is what happened with Korea. And this caused a lot of trouble at the end of the 1800s into 1900s, because these noble families, very proud of themselves, very proud. The Kyungju-chae family, the Andong Kim family, whatever, very proud. And then suddenly there's 1 million people saying, I'm Andong Kim family. And they're saying, no, those people are not. You are not. Get out of here. You are slave people. You are not part of our family. No, we are great nobility. We're pure bloodline for 1,500 years, blah, blah, blah. There was all this trouble about this and some violence and all as they rejected all those millions of people, not as family members, but then by the Japanese colonial era, after Mr. Sunjay, as capitalism is developing, company capitalism, selling, retail, building big companies, many of these families, it became more advantage to have family members. To count people, oh yeah, our family is 1 million members and they all buy our product. By the factory that is owned by the Andong Kim family, all of our family members are customers, yes. That becomes financial advantage and people putting money together. Those poor members of the family, former slaves, who did get some money, got rich by capitalism, started a business, then they started to be welcomed by the family. The real family, the noble family, welcome because they had money now. And then, much later, by the time you get to the 1940s, democracy. And with democracy, everybody voting, then, once again, having a big family is a big advantage. The Kyungju-chae family, who I studied, very much went through it. Now they have 2.2 million members, and they're proud of that. They're proud that we're a big family. When it comes to elections and democracy and voting and such, they spread the word through the family who you should vote for, support it. That gives the leaders of that family much political power. Although the family members might not obey them, might not go. We're going to have a break soon. Don't get nervous. We'll break soon. But they did this. This came to a real peak just about 15 years ago when President Roh Moo-hyun was elected president. Roh Moo-hyun, you remember him? Older people. Roh Moo-hyun, a leftist liberal guy. This was extraordinary because every president of Korea, every prime minister, every leader had been from Yangban families, the old nobility. Even a guy like Kim Dae-jung and such a good, solid Yangban bloodline background. But then Roh Moo-hyun, he came out of the slave class. He was a former slave. His family members, he couldn't even go to school. Nobody would give him a job back in the 50s, 60s, as just the lowest level of society. He worked his own way up, studied by himself enough to pass the bar exam to be a lawyer. He couldn't get into any good university. Nobody would allow him, even if he did have the money to get into Yonsei or something. They wouldn't let him in. As such, but he studied by himself, became a lawyer, became a human rights lawyer, democracy lawyer, labor lawyer, and rose through the political ranks, ended up being elected president. And then there was a problem, his wife. His wife was named Kwan. And again, she was from the lowest slave level people. She had no education. She couldn't get an education in early Korea. It would just be impossible. And so a woman like her, the only job she could ever get would be like cleaning this kind of building, cleaning buildings, one of those ajamas you see, cleaning the floors and the toilets. That's the only job she could ever get. Suddenly, she's first lady of Korea because she was married to him. She's in Cheongwa-dae, the Blue House, first lady. Oops. And then the Andong Kwan family. There's only one Kwan family. Other families can get away with saying, oh, they're a different branch of the family. It's a different branch. But there's only one Andong Kwan family. And she's Kwan. So what do? The leaders of the Andong Kwan family, I knew one of them. It was my boss's husband. And he was one of the top political leaders of Korea, and he was godfather of the Andong Kwan family, the most powerful man. I talked to him. We had coffee, and I talked to him about this problem. When Roh Moo-hyun was first elected, it's like, what are we going to do? She's a slave class person, but now she's first lady of Korea. What do we do? And I proud to say, I actually advised him to be American about it. Be American, where you ignore all this stuff and you